Caius Carter's office was on the 50th floor of a tall building. It was big and fancy, with shiny furniture and big windows that showed the whole city of Manhattan. Caius was very proud of his office. It showed how successful he was. At 40 years old, he had built a big real estate business, and people were always nervous when they heard his name. That morning, the sunlight was shining through the windows, making everything look bright and shiny. Caius stood by the window looking out. On the outside, he looked calm, but inside, he felt very upset. Then he got a message from his secretary, Isolde. Caius took a deep breath, fixed his tie, and pressed a button on his desk. "I'm busy," he said. But Isolde's voice came back, sounding shaky but still strong. "Caius, we need to talk about the test results." For a moment, it was quiet. Caius closed his eyes and felt the weight of her words. He spoke coldly, trying not to show his feelings. "I already know." Isolde's voice broke a little as she spoke. "Then there's nothing left to talk about." Caius thought about Isolde sitting in her little office, maybe trying not to cry, but he knew she would cry soon. His heart hurt, but he stayed strong. He didn't want to show weakness. "How can you say that? We're still a couple," Isolde said, her voice breaking, but she was still strong. Caius looked at his desk, at a fancy pen with his name on it. He knew no words could fix things. His voice stayed low and firm. "There's nothing more to talk about, Isolde. You understand that." Isolde laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "No one knows better than me how stubborn you are, Caius, but this isn't fair. You left me, not because you didn't love me, but because I couldn't give you a child," Isolde said, her voice full of pain. "Don't you see that?" Her words hit Caius hard, like a punch in the chest, but he didn't show it. "I didn't leave you," he said firmly. "I did what had to be done." Isolde took a deep breath. "Good luck, Caius. You're going to need it more than anyone." Then she hung up. The room became so quiet it felt heavy. Caius stared out the window, but his mind went back to the past, when he believed love could fix anything. Later that day, Caius's lawyer, Graham, came in carrying a briefcase. Caius signed the divorce papers, ending his 5-year marriage to Isolde. He told Graham to handle everything quickly and quietly so it wouldn't hurt his business. Weeks went by. Caius worked hard, making deals and acting like nothing was wrong. But at night, in his empty penthouse, he couldn't escape the silence. He took down all the pictures of Isolde. The blank spaces on the walls reminded him of her, but he told himself it was the right choice. One cold evening, Caius got an email saying the divorce was final. Isolde hadn't argued about the terms or asked for anything more. She had stayed quiet. For a moment, Caius wished she had fought back. He missed her fiery spirit, the strong-willed woman he used to love. But her silence hurt him even more. "So it's done," he whispered to himself. Time passed. One morning in the spring, Caius took a walk in Central Park. His doctor had told him to walk more to help with stress. The park was filled with families. Kids were laughing, parents were pushing strollers, and swings were squeaking. Caius never paid attention to these things before, but today it felt different. As he walked, he heard a laugh that made him stop. It sounded so familiar. He turned and saw her. Isolde. She was sitting on a bench reading a book to a little girl. The girl looked about 3 years old with curly hair and bright eyes. She was listening to Isolde and flipping the pages of the book. Caius couldn't move. Everything else in the park seemed to disappear. All he could see was Isolde and the child. He stepped closer, his heart racing. When he was only a few steps away, Isolde looked up. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stop. Isolde didn't look away. She was calm, strong, and different from the woman Caius had known before. The little girl pulled on Isolde's sleeve and asked, "Mommy, who's that?" Caius's heart skipped a beat. "Mommy," he whispered to himself. He looked at Isolde, waiting for her answer. Isolde smiled softly at the girl, brushing her hair gently. Then she looked back at Caius. "This is an old friend, Zara," she said. Caius's throat felt tight. He finally managed to speak. "Isolde, is she..." Your daughter? Isolde stood up, holding Zara's hand. Her eyes met Caius's, full of meaning. Yes, Caius. This is Zara, my daughter. Caius's world turned upside down. He couldn't believe it. The spring breeze gently moved the leaves, but for Caius, everything had stopped. Isolde, the woman he had loved and left, sat on the bench by the lake. Isolde's long hair fell over her shoulders, and she looked happy and peaceful in a way Caius didn't remember seeing before. Next to her was a little girl with wavy brown hair who looked just like Isolde. The girl rested her head on Isolde's shoulder while Isolde read from a children's book. And then the little duckling realized he was different from the others. Isolde said with a soft and cheerful voice. The little girl giggled, her bright eyes shining. But being different doesn't mean you're less special, right, Mommy? The girl asked. Isolde smiled and kissed the top of the little girl's head. That's right, Zara. Being different is the most special gift we have. Hearing the name Zara made Caius freeze. Memories rushed back to him. Long ago, Isolde had told him she would name her daughter Zara because she thought the name was pure and strong. Caius's heart started pounding. Was this little girl Isolde's daughter? And if so, why did she have the name they had once chosen together? Before Caius could figure it out, a tall man appeared holding 2 ice cream cones. He smiled brightly at Isolde and the little girl. Here are my 2 favorite girls, he said, giving the cones to Isolde and Zara. Thank you, Uncle Robert. Zara said happily as she grabbed the ice cream with her small hands. Caius clenched his fists. He felt a mix of jealousy, sadness, and anger. The scene looked like a perfect family picture, but it didn't include him. Caius wanted to walk over to them and talk, but he was too afraid. He felt like an outsider. As he stood there watching, Zara laughed while eating her ice cream. Her laugh mixed with Isolde and Robert's voices, and it felt like music in the air. But to Caius, it made him feel even more left out. Zara ran toward the ducks by the lake, laughing and throwing breadcrumbs to them. Isolde followed her, her laughter joining Zara's. Robert stayed back on the bench, smiling warmly at them. Careful, princess, he called out. Caius's heart ached as he remembered why he had left Isolde years ago. She couldn't have children, and he hadn't been able to accept that. But now, here she was, a loving mother. Regret filled Caius's chest as he leaned against a tree, his eyes never leaving them. Suddenly, Caius's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a reminder about an important meeting. He sighed, knowing he couldn't stay. As he turned to leave, he saw Zara get scared when a duck pecked her foot. She started crying, and Isolde quickly picked her up to comfort her. Robert, who was actually Isolde's brother, took pictures of them, smiling brightly. They looked so happy, like a real family. Caius walked away, his steps heavy with sadness. The next day, Caius couldn't focus at work. He sat in a meeting with his executives, but his mind kept drifting back to Isolde and Zara. When someone asked him a question, he had to ask them to repeat it. This was unusual because Caius was always sharp and quick. Noticing something was wrong, Vanessa, his vice president, suggested a short break. Everyone left the room except for Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Caius closely. Something is bothering you, she said gently. Caius sighed and sat back in his chair. I saw Isolde yesterday, he said quietly. She has a child now. Vanessa didn't rush him. She waited for him to continue. The girl's name is Zara, Caius said, his voice breaking. If I hadn't been so foolish. He couldn't finish the sentence. Vanessa stayed silent, giving him space. This morning I hired a detective, Caius admitted. I need to know more about her life. Vanessa looked surprised, but didn't interrupt. Caius continued. Isolde adopted Zara 2 years ago. The little girl was abandoned by her birth mother at the hospital. Isolde lives in a small apartment near a good school. Her brother, Robert, lives in the same building. They seem like a family. Vanessa listened quietly, then said softly, And that bothers you? Caius slammed his phone onto the table, his anger and sadness spilling out. Of course it bothers me. he shouted. I left Isolde because she couldn't have children, and now she's proving me wrong. His words were filled with pain and regret. Vanessa watched him, her face calm but full of understanding. Family is more than just blood, she said gently. Caius walked to the window, staring at the busy city below. I got some test results recently, he said, his voice low. It turns out I'm the one who can't, not Isoldrin. Not Isolde. It was my fault all along. Vanessa Caius processed his emotions. What do you plan to do? She asked after a while. I don't know, Caius said, his voice barely a whisper. But I can't ignore what I've done. Maybe it's time to make things right. Vanessa nodded, her eyes filled with concern. She knew it wouldn't be easy for Caius to fix the mistakes he had made, but she hoped he would find a way to heal the pain in his heart. Caius bowed his head like he had been hurt by sharp words. He said, She's built a new life. She has a daughter now. She has friends and a small family. She's happy. Vanessa, his friend, looked at him with concern. And you? She asked gently. Are you happy? Caius felt like her question had hit him hard. He couldn't answer right away. It made him think about things he had tried to ignore. For the past 4 years, Caius had spent all his time working. He had built a big business, an empire, and it was very successful. But his home was quiet and lonely. At night when he went home, there was no one waiting for him. His big, powerful empire felt empty and sad. Meanwhile, Isolde, his ex-wife, had found happiness with others, people he had left behind. Caius wondered if he could fix what had gone wrong. Was it too late? Vanessa seemed to know what he needed. She said firmly, I'm canceling all your meetings for today. You need time to think about what you really want. Then she walked out of the room, leaving Caius alone with his thoughts. He looked at some papers sent by a private investigator. One picture caught his eye. Isolde leaving a hospital holding a little girl named Zara. Both of them were smiling. Isolde's eyes looked peaceful, happier than he had ever seen. Caius's hand brushed the screen, pausing on Isolde's face. He felt emptiness inside. He realized that all his choices had left him lonely. That night, Caius opened a box he had kept hidden. Inside were wedding photos of him and Isolde. One was from their honeymoon in Tuscany. In it, Isolde was smiling, and Caius had his arms around her. They looked so happy, like nothing could ever go wrong. But now, regret washed over Caius. He thought about how pride and selfishness had made him lose the most precious thing in his life. He couldn't sit still anymore. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. Graham, I need your help, Caius said. Find out everything about Isolde's adoption process. And find me a good therapist in the city. It's urgent. The next day, Caius went to Dr. Lauren Barrett's office. She was a well-known therapist. Her office wasn't fancy like Caius had expected. Instead, it was cozy and simple, with soft lighting that made the room feel welcoming. Caius felt nervous, but also like he could finally talk. Dr. Lawson, a kind woman in her 50s, looked at Caius closely and asked, What brings you here? Caius adjusted his tie nervously and took a deep breath. I made a big mistake 4 years ago, he admitted. It changed everything. I'm only now starting to see how wrong I was. For 45 minutes, Caius talked about Isolde, how their relationship had fallen apart, and how his obsession with work had ruined everything. He also shared his feelings about not being able to have children. Dr. Lawson listened carefully. When he was done, she asked gently, What do you hope to get from these sessions? Caius hesitated, but he finally said, I want to be a better person, a person who deserves a second chance. In the weeks that followed, Caius worked hard in therapy. Even though his job kept him busy, he made time for his sessions. He started thinking about how he had acted over the years and what he needed to change. He realized he couldn't undo the past, but he could try to be better. One day after therapy, Caius decided to walk through Central Park. He passed a bench by the lake where he had once seen Isolde and Zara. The bench was empty, but the memory stayed with him. Isolde had looked so happy holding Zara, her eyes full of peace. Later, Caius got an email from the detective with more details about Isolde and Zara. But Caius didn't open it. He remembered Dr. Lawson's advice. Digging into the past wouldn't help. He needed to focus on fixing himself, not following Isolde's life. At work, Vanessa noticed changes in Caius. He was more patient and kind. Once, he spent an entire afternoon at a meeting just to support an employee whose daughter had a school event. "You're different," Vanessa said, handing him a report. "I'm trying to change," Caius replied, still looking at his work. During a therapy session, Dr. Lawson gave Caius a new task. "Write a letter to Isolde," she said. "You don't have to send it, just write your thoughts." That night, Caius sat down to write. It took him hours. He wrote and rewrote the letter, pouring out everything he felt. Finally, he finished and read it. "Isolde, I spent 4 years building skyscrapers, but I destroyed what really mattered. I blamed you for not giving me a child, but now I see it was my fault. I wasn't ready to be a father because I didn't even know how to be a good person. When I saw you and Zara in the park, I realized how wrong I had been. Family isn't about blood or legacy. It's about love and growing together. You found your family, and I'm happy for you, even though it hurts to know I'm not part of it. I'm trying to change, not just for you, but because I need to. I want to learn how to love the right way. Caius." When the sun rose, Caius stared at the letter. He wasn't sure if he would ever send it, but writing it had made him feel lighter. In his next session, Dr. Lawson read the letter and asked, "How did it feel to write this?" "It hurt," Caius admitted, "and I'm scared. I'm scared it's too late to fix things." Dr. Lawson smiled gently. "It's never too late to change. But remember, real change takes time. Isolde might not be waiting." Caius nodded, thinking deeply. That night, at home, he watched a video of his wedding. In one part, he and Isolde were dancing. She was smiling brightly, her eyes full of love. Caius whispered something to her, and they both laughed. He paused the video on her happy face and felt his heart ache. Caius stared at the glowing computer screen, his heart heavy with regret. He thought about everything he had lost. Then, in that quiet moment, Caius made a choice. He picked up his phone and dialed Vanessa's number. When she answered, his voice was steady and full of determination. "Vanessa, I need to make some changes at the company," Caius said. "What kind of changes?" Vanessa asked. Her tone showed she might already know what he was going to say. "I'm reducing my office hours," Caius replied firmly. "I'll work 3 days a week." Why only 3 days?" Vanessa pressed. "Because I need time to fix myself," Caius said slowly. "I need to learn how to put people first, not just work and money." After the call, Caius opened his calendar and added more sessions with Dr. Lawson, his therapist. He knew that to truly change, he had to step out of his comfort zone. Then, Caius did something unexpected. He signed up to be a volunteer mentor for kids who needed help. For a man who once thought life was all about making money, this was a big step. When Caius arrived at the Brooklyn Community Center, he felt out of place. The building wasn't fancy like his office, the walls needed painting, and the furniture was old. But the energy in the place was warm and full of purpose. "Welcome to the mentoring program." Monica Chun, the project coordinator, greeted him with a kind smile. She was a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes that made Caius feel at ease. "I was surprised to get your application," Monica said. Caius, in his fancy suit, felt out of place in the casual, lively atmosphere. He adjusted his glasses nervously. "I think it's time I give back to the community," he said, his voice soft but sincere. Monica nodded and led Caius down a hallway. The walls were covered with colorful drawings made by the kids. Monica stopped at a room where children were working on their homework. She pointed to a boy sitting alone in the corner. "That's Oliver," she said. "He lost his parents 2 years ago and now lives with his grandmother. He struggles with math and has a hard time trusting people." Caius looked at Oliver, hunched over his notebook, frustration written all over his face. Something about the boy tugged at Caius's heart. "Can I try?" Caius asked, unsure if he could really help. Monica nodded. Caius walked over to Oliver and gently said, "Hi, Oliver. I heard math is tricky for you." Oliver didn't look up. "I don't need help," he said sharply. "You know, I hated math too when I was your age," Caius said with a small smile. "But then I learned it's like solving a puzzle. Once you figure out how the pieces fit, it's not so bad." Oliver hesitated, then slowly slid his notebook toward Caius. "I can't do these fractions," he mumbled. Caius took off his jacket and sat down next to Oliver. He explained the problem step by step, using simple examples. Little by little, Oliver started to relax. By the time they finished, there was a tiny smile on Oliver's face. "You're different from the other adults," Oliver said. "They always seem like they're in a hurry, but you're not." Oliver's words stayed with Caius as he went home. For years, Caius had been so busy chasing money and power that he hadn't stopped to make a real difference in someone's life. At his next therapy session, Caius told Dr. Lawson about his time with Oliver. "How did it feel to help him?" Dr. Lawson asked gently. Caius thought for a moment. "It felt good," he said. "Not because of money or success, but because I helped someone." Dr. Lawson smiled. "That's a big step, Caius. You're learning what truly matters." In the weeks that followed, Caius built a new routine. He worked 3 days in the office and spent 2 days at the community center. Vanessa helped adjust his schedule so he could focus on what was important. Slowly, Caius started to change. He became more patient and thoughtful. One weekend, Oliver showed Caius his report card. "I got a B+ in math," Oliver said proudly, his eyes shining. Caius smiled. "That's amazing, Oliver. You worked hard and you earned it." Oliver grinned. "My grandma wants to meet you. She's making lasagna on Sunday." Caius hesitated but agreed. On Sunday, he went to Oliver's home. The small apartment was cozy and full of life. Family photos covered the walls, and the smell of lasagna filled the air. Oliver's grandmother, a kind woman with silver hair, welcomed Caius warmly. "Oliver talks about you all the time," she said with a smile. "It's nice to see him happy again." During dinner, Caius shared stories from his childhood, memories he hadn't talked about in years. The warmth of the family made him realize how much he had missed out on. As he walked home that night, Caius felt something change inside him. He started to understand that life wasn't about work or money. It was about connections, love, and the simple joys of being with others. One day, while walking in the park with Oliver, Caius heard a familiar voice. "Caius," the voice said softly. He turned and saw Isolde, his ex-wife, standing with a little girl holding her hand. Caius's heart skipped a beat. "Isolde," he said, his voice shaky. "Who's this?" Isolde asked, looking at Oliver. "This is Oliver," Caius replied. "I'm his mentor." Isolde's expression softened. "I didn't know you were mentoring kids." "Oliver has taught me a lot," Caius said, trying to keep his voice steady. Isolde smiled faintly, then turned to the little girl. "Come on, Zara, let's go see the ducks." As Isolde walked away, Oliver looked up at Caius. "She wasn't just a friend, was she?" Oliver asked. Caius sighed and sat on a bench. "No, Oliver, she was my wife." His voice was filled with sadness. Oliver was quiet for a moment. "Do you think you'll see her again?" "I don't know," Caius said honestly. Caius found it hard to talk about what was in his heart. "She was my wife." "What happened?" Oliver asked, his innocent eyes full of concern. "I made mistakes," Caius admitted quietly. "I cared too much about money and work and forgot about the things that really mattered." Oliver listened closely, trying to understand. Even though he was young, it felt like he could see how hard life could be. "So is that why you started helping at the center? To make up for what you did?" Oliver asked seriously. "How did it feel seeing her with Zara?" Caius didn't answer right away. He looked far away, like he was searching for the right words. "It felt different than I thought it would," Caius said, his voice shaking a little. "I felt jealous and sad, but also proud of Isolde. She's worked so hard to turn her pain into something good. It makes me want to try even harder to win her back." Oliver nodded, his young face serious as he thought about Caius's words. That night, Caius sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. But the numbers didn't mean much to him anymore. His mind was somewhere else. Am I good enough for her now? He wondered. Not just to get back together, but so she can see that I've really changed. The next week, Caius made big changes at his company. He started a scholarship program for his employees and their kids. He also changed the rules so workers could take time off to care for their families. Um, Most surprisingly, he started a mentoring program to help others grow, even though he knew the company's board wouldn't like it. Companies are made of people, not just numbers, Caius said firmly during a meeting. His vice president, Vanessa, was shocked. She had never seen Caius talk like this before. One afternoon, Caius was looking at colorful drawings sent to him by kids from the community center when his phone rang. It was Monica Chun, a staff member from the center. Mr. Carter, we have a situation, Monica said. Oliver's grandmother had a small accident. She's in the hospital and Oliver is asking for you. Without thinking twice, Caius canceled all his meetings and drove to the hospital. Work could wait. Oliver and his family were more important. When Caius arrived at the New Haven hospital, everything felt quiet and serious. He walked down a long hallway, looking for Oliver. Finally, he spotted the boy sitting in a chair, looking very small and sad. Hey, champ, Caius said softly, sitting next to Oliver. Oliver looked up at Caius with teary eyes, then jumped into his arms, crying hard. Caius held him tight, whispering kind words to help him feel better. As Oliver began to calm down, he looked up. Caius followed his gaze and saw someone at the end of the hallway. It was Isolde. She was wearing a doctor's coat, her hair shorter than before, but her eyes still had the same warmth Caius remembered. Oliver noticed Caius staring. Is that? Oliver started to ask, but Caius didn't reply. Isolde stood quietly, looking at Caius. They didn't say anything to each other, but their eyes met. It was like they could understand everything without speaking a word. Caius felt something change inside him at that moment. He realized it wasn't just about winning Isolde back. It was about fixing everything he had broken and building a better life. Over the next few days, Caius spent most of his time at the hospital. Oliver's grandmother, Grandma Serafina, needed surgery for her broken hip. Caius rearranged his work schedule to stay with Oliver, taking phone calls from the hospital and sitting in uncomfortable chairs for hours. Caius knew he still had a lot to fix, both at work and in his personal life. But holding Oliver close, he realized what truly mattered, being there for the people who needed him most. It's going to be okay, Caius whispered to Oliver, meaning it with all his heart. Caius had never felt such a strong promise in his life before. He understood for the first time how important it was to take care of the boy leaning on him. It's going to be okay. Caius whispered into Oliver's ear, feeling the boy's breaths. And in that moment, Caius knew the promise he had just made was real. For the next 3 days, the hospital became Caius's world. Oliver's grandmother, Serafina, had fallen and needed surgery on her hip. Caius rearranged his work schedule and spent most of his time at the hospital, balancing phone calls with long hours in uncomfortable chairs. One day, while sitting in the waiting room, a nurse called Caius's name. Mr. Carter, Dr. Wilson would like to speak with you, she said seriously. Caius felt nervous and couldn't stop thinking about Isolde. He followed the nurse into a small room where Isolde was waiting. She was wearing her white doctor's coat, holding a clipboard. She looked at him with a serious but concerned expression. Serafina's surgery was successful, Isolde began. But she's going to need special care during her recovery, at least 6 weeks. Caius listened, but he couldn't stop looking at Isolde. Something was different about her now, like she was more confident. Isolde continued, "We need to talk about Oliver." Caius felt a rush of thoughts. He had already been thinking about what would happen to Oliver while Serafina was in the hospital. "I can take care of him," Caius said quickly. "I have the space, and I already know him well." Isolde looked at him carefully, checking if he was really sure. Are you sure? This is a big responsibility, she asked, her clear in her voice. Caius looked straight into Isolde's eyes and replied, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Isolde was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I'll prepare everything, she said, and Caius agreed to take care of Oliver. Later that night, Caius brought Oliver to his big apartment. Oliver had only a small backpack with a few things inside. He looked around the apartment in awe. Your apartment looks different than I imagined, Oliver said, noticing the paintings and decorations. It's home now, Caius replied softly, feeling a warm feeling inside him. Come on, I'll show you your room. Caius had turned the guest room into a space just for Oliver, with superhero posters and a special lamp that made stars appear on the ceiling. Oliver was surprised. You did all this today? He asked. Caius chuckled. Vanessa helped me. She's much better at decorating than I am. In the days that followed, Caius realized that taking care of Oliver wasn't just a responsibility. It became the best thing Caius had ever done. It wasn't always easy, but every smile from Oliver, every thank you, made it all worth it. Caius woke up early to make pancakes for breakfast, helped Oliver with his homework, and spent time playing video games with him. 3 days later, Isolde visited Caius's apartment with Zara. Zara seemed really happy to meet Oliver. Zara asked if she could see Oliver's dinosaur collection, and they went off to his room to look at it. Isolde walked around the apartment, noticing the little changes that made it look like a real home. This apartment has really changed, Isolde said. It shows who you've become. Caius quietly replied, It reflects who I am now. As she walked around, Isolde noticed an old picture of her and Caius together. Why do you keep this picture? She asked. Caius paused, thinking before he answered, to remind me of what I had and what I lost, and now what I need is the laughter of children. Just then, Oliver and Zara ran into the room, laughing and talking excitedly. Oliver has all the Harry Potter books. Can we read them together? Zara asked, her face full of joy. Isolde smiled softly and looked at Caius. We shouldn't impose, she said, but Caius smiled back and said, It's okay. In fact, we could make it a regular thing. Reading together, having dinner, maybe it could change everything. There was a moment of quiet, and Isolde looked at both kids, then replied, Okay, we'll see how it goes. After they left, Caius sat on his balcony looking at the city. Oliver came to sit beside him. You still love her, don't you? Oliver asked. Caius sighed, thinking carefully. Love is complicated, son, he said. Sometimes loving someone means giving them space to be happy, even if it's without you. Oliver thought about it for a moment and asked, But what if they still love you? Caius smiled sadly. Then I have to prove I'm worthy of that love with actions, not just words. That night, after tucking Oliver into bed, Caius sat at his desk writing in his therapy journal. He remembered what Dr. Lawson had suggested and began writing honestly. Today, for the first time in years, my apartment felt like a home, not because of the furniture, but because of the laughter of children and moments filled with love. In the mornings, Caius and Oliver worked together to get ready for school. They played games, did homework, and had simple, meaningful conversations. Everything seemed to flow smoothly, not as a responsibility, but as a joy. One afternoon, Oliver came into Caius's office holding an envelope. This is for me, Oliver said, excited. It's an invitation to the parent-teacher meeting. Caius looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of responsibility. Would you like me to go with you? He asked. Oliver hesitated, then asked, Do you think Grandma will be upset? Caius smiled, reassuring him. No, she won't. We can go together. She's great at therapy, and I'm sure she'll be happy to join us. Later, Caius got a text from Isolde asking to meet at Bluestone Cafe. When he arrived, Isolde was already there with her green tea, looking serious. Oliver's been having nightmares, she said. He told me about them the last time we met. Caius nodded. I've noticed, he said. It usually happens after he visits Serafina. Isolde asked gently. How are you handling it? I sit with him sometimes, Caius replied. Sometimes we just talk. Other times we have hot chocolate. One night, we even built a blanket fort at 3 a.m. Isolde smiled, impressed. You've really changed, she said. I had to, Caius said. Oliver showed me a side of life I had forgotten. Isolde paused before sharing something important. I need to tell you about Zara, she said. Caius felt his heart race. When I adopted her, it wasn't just a coincidence. Her mother had the same problem as me, and I helped her through it. Isolde told Caius about the difficult time she had, supporting Zara's biological mother through the pregnancy and the decision to put Zara up for adoption. She explained how Zara's mother had asked Isolde to be Zara's mother because she knew Isolde would understand. Caius looked at Isolde, his heart filled with respect and sympathy. You're an amazing mother, he said, his voice sincere. Zara was proof that Isolde smiled, but it was a sad smile. Her eyes were shiny but far away. It's funny, isn't it? She said, her voice with a little self-mockery. For years, I thought not being able to have my own children was a curse, but now I see it opened me up to a different kind of love, a love that they chose. Caius looked at her, understanding everything she meant. Love isn't always about blood, he said. It's about a real connection, like the love I have for Oliver. Isolde smiled, her voice soft but sincere. That's how I feel about Oliver, too, she said. Everything seemed calm in that moment. After a while, Caius brought up an important meeting. There's a parent-teacher conference next week, he said, tapping his fingers on the table. I'll go, Isolde nodded. I know, she replied. I need to file a report too. Can you pass it along to me? Caius smiled. Of course, I'll take care of it. Join us for dinner? Isolde asked, looking at him with little hesitation. Oliver would like it, and so would Zara. Caius looked back at her, like quiet for a moment. Then he smiled softly. I've learned to be honest about how I feel, he said, and I like it when we say goodbye. The room seemed lighter, as if all worries were gone with those words. Later, after Isolde left, Caius went back to his office, his mind still full of thoughts. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons. Caius looked at a drawing Oliver had made. Oliver had drawn a family under a starry sky, but there were more people in the picture, not just his family. Caius thought about how his life had changed. That evening, Caius sat on his apartment balcony, looking at the city below. The lights twinkled in the darkness, and he felt a peaceful feeling inside. He realized that life had taken him down paths he hadn't planned for, but he couldn't imagine life without those moments. After Oliver went to bed, Caius looked at his phone, thinking for a moment before typing a message to Isolde. Thank you for sharing Zara's story today. You showed me that family is more than just blood. It's love. He sent it, then waited. Just a few minutes later, he got a reply. Thank you for showing me that people can change. Caius smiled, feeling a calmness inside. Life was different now, and he was glad for it. At Riverside School, Caius walked with Serafina through the halls, following Oliver, who was proud to show off his science project. This is my solar system project, Oliver said, beaming. I got a perfect score. Caius smiled and looked at the planets. The rings of Saturn are impressive, he said. How did you make it look like that? Isolde helped, Oliver said, looking up at Caius with a thankful smile. The connection between Isolde and Caius's family had grown strong. It wasn't just about help anymore. It was care, love, and sharing. Isolde and Zara walked in just as Oliver rushed to greet his best friend. Zara, he yelled, hugging her. Isolde apologized for being late, explaining that there was an emergency at the hospital, but she had made it in time for the meeting. Later, after the meeting, they went out to eat at an Italian restaurant. The kids talked excitedly about planets while the adults shared their thoughts. The doctor says I can go home next week, Serafina said. She smiled, but there was strength in her voice. Caius felt it too. Life had brought them closer, and they all felt more connected. Isolde looked at Caius. I've hired a nurse to help during the day, he said, and we've made your home safer. Isolde smiled softly, grateful. You've thought of everything, she said. Caius smiled back, his hand lightly touching the cup in front of him. He had learned to pay attention to what really mattered. After dinner, Isolde pulled Caius aside to talk about Oliver's return home. We need to talk about the transition, she said, her voice serious. When Oliver comes back, we don't want to lose contact with him. Isolde's words made Caius think. I would love to keep in touch, he said softly. Isolde smiled and agreed. They both understood that something deeper was happening, even if they couldn't say it out loud. That night, as they drove home, Oliver was asleep in the back seat. Caius felt a quiet emptiness that slowly disappeared. Life had changed, but it felt like everything had found its place. Later that night, Caius received a message from Isolde. Zara can't stop talking about those book dinners, it said. I think we've set some expectations. Caius smiled, replying, I promise I won't let you down. Isolde's next message made him smile even more. She's always so methodical. Caius could imagine her smile as she typed. It's nice to see that side of you used for something really special, she said. That evening, Caius reflected in his therapy journal. Sitting at the restaurant with Isolde, Zara, and Oliver, he had realized something important. A family isn't something you own, it's something you build. Every small moment of care, every smile, is a part of the foundation. And in that moment, Caius knew they were building something beautiful together. On a rainy Friday in November, Caius set up his living room for a special Harry Potter night. He made it cozy, with cushions and soft lights, a place for everyone to gather. Isolde looked at the setup and smiled. Hogwarts would be proud of you, she said. Caius smiled back, happy to see the kids enjoying themselves. They were creating memories that would last forever. Later, when the book reading began, Caius acted out characters, even doing his best Hagrid voice, which made everyone laugh. Isolde looked at him and smiled. You seem different, she said softly. The Caius I knew would never do something like this. Caius paused for a moment, then spoke. The person you knew is gone, he said, his voice quiet. I had to lose everything to realize what really mattered. Isolde looked at him, but there were no more words, just understanding. A moment of silence passed before Zara asked, Mom, can I sleep over tonight? Oliver agreed. Isolde looked at Caius for approval, and he smiled. There's room for everyone. That night, after the kids fell asleep, Caius and Isolde found themselves outside, watching the rain. The world felt quiet, and Isolde broke the silence. Do you remember our first place? She asked, her voice soft. Caius smiled, remembering. How could I forget? He said. We were happy there, even with all the problems. Isolde asked, Why the change now? Caius looked at her, his voice sincere. Because I finally understand what I lost, he said. I want to build something real now. Not what we had, but something new. Thunder rumbled, and Isolde shivered. She whispered, I'm scared. Scared to trust again. Caius understood. I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give, he said. And as the rain fell, the silence between them felt full of unspoken words. Somewhere inside the apartment, life was slowly changing, one moment at a time. The soft laughter of the children could be heard, but Caius and Isolde didn't seem to notice. In that moment, their world was quiet, filled with things they didn't say and emotions hidden deep inside. They both hoped that one day they could find what they had lost. The children were still asleep, but there was a feeling in the air that made Isolde ask, Should we check on them? She looked at Caius, but he didn't move right away. They silently agreed to stay where they were, their eyes meeting. Isolde took a small step toward Caius, then stopped. She didn't say anything, and the space between them felt bigger than before. Finally, she whispered, This is complicated. Life always is, Caius replied softly, like he was letting go of his worries. But this time, I'm not trying to control it, I'm just living. Isolde smiled a little and looked at him for a long time, like she found comfort in his words. She knew that tonight's Harry Potter story had sparked this conversation. Magic wasn't just in books, it was in moments like this. You're kidding, right? She laughed softly, her laugh warm and comforting. The tension in Caius's heart faded. They walked into the living room to check on the kids. The sight before them made them stop. Zara and Oliver were fast asleep on the floor, surrounded by books and pillows, like they had created their own little world. The soft light from the small lamps made everything look warm and peaceful. I think they found their little corner of Hogwarts, Isolde said, smiling with love. Caius looked at the scene, and a deep feeling filled his chest. He realized how much he had changed, not just himself, but also how he saw family. You know, he began, his voice soft but thoughtful, I've learned something important over the past few months. Family isn't something you plan. It just happens, little by little, like a tree growing toward the sun. Isolde looked at him with understanding in her eyes, and there was a hint of hope in them, like she had been waiting for him to say these words for a long time. So you really have changed, she said, her eyes shining. I hope so, Caius answered, his voice soft but sincere. Isolde smiled, and in that smile, there was a promise that things could get better, even though there was still so much they hadn't said. Serafina's return home marked a new chapter for all of them. Her apartment, now set up to help with her recovery, became the place where everyone gathered on weekends. Caius kept his promise to be there for Oliver, and visits became more regular, especially with Isolde and Zara. The coldness between them slowly melted away, and soon everything felt like a warm family again. One peaceful Sunday afternoon, the apartment felt calm. Zara and Oliver were playing in Oliver's room, laughing as their voices echoed throughout the space. But then Serafina called Caius into the room. Her voice was serious. Sit down, my friend, she said, motioning to the chair beside her. We need to have an important talk. Caius felt nervous. He wondered if something had happened. What is it, Serafina? He asked, his voice tight with worry. She shook her head. It's nothing too bad, she said, but the concern was clear in her eyes. It's about Oliver, about you, and about Isolde's heart. Caius felt his heart start to race. Serafina always seemed to notice everything. I see how you and Isolde are, she said. You've built this little family without even realizing it. Oliver has never been happier, you know that, even before he lost his parents. Serafina, Caius started to say, but Serafina raised her hand, telling him to wait. Let me finish, she said firmly. I'm getting older, and even though I'm doing better, I need to think about Oliver's future. Caius felt a tightness in his chest. What are you suggesting? He asked, feeling anxious. I want you to be Oliver's legal guardian, along with me, Serafina said, because one day, when I'm not here anymore. She didn't finish, but Caius could tell what she meant. No, don't say that, Caius interrupted, feeling pain in his voice. That's just life, Serafina said gently, but with love. You love Oliver like he's your own son. Anyone can see that. Her words hit Caius hard, like a gentle slap to the face. He realized that even though he had always cared for Oliver, hearing Serafina say it made everything feel more real. Yes, I love Oliver, Caius whispered. I've known it for a while, but hearing you say it makes it clearer than ever. I've spoken with my lawyer, Serafina said, holding up some papers. The documents are ready. I just need to know if you'll accept this responsibility. Caius looked at her, feeling the weight of her love for Oliver. After a brief moment of hesitation, he took her hand firmly, looking at her with determination. It would be an honor, he said, his voice warm and sincere. But Serafina, you've been there for me for so long. I can't thank you enough for that. Serafina smiled gently. While I'm still here, she said softly, I'd be happy to see this family grow with you as an important part of it. Caius understood. This was a turning point in his life, and he was ready to take on the responsibility, not just for Oliver, but for Isolde and their family. Later, Caius was alone in the room, feeling uneasy. He called his therapist, Dr. Lawson. "Hey, doctor," Caius said, his voice low with worry. "I need a session." Dr. Lawson asked about Seraphina's proposal, and Caius admitted he was terrified. "I wasn't responsible for what happened before, but what if I'm not good enough? What if I make the same mistakes again?" he asked, fear in his voice. Dr. Lawson was quiet for a moment, then said, "The fact that you recognize these patterns shows how much you've grown, Caius. Besides, you've already been like a father to Oliver for months now. This will just make it official, but I don't think it will change how you feel about him." Caius nodded, realizing Dr. Lawson was right. "Nothing can change how I feel about Oliver," he said without hesitation. The next day, Caius signed the papers. As he did, he received a message from Isolde. "Oliver told me about the guardianship. I'm so proud of you." Caius smiled as he read the message and replied, "Can we talk, just the two of us?" They met at Central Park, where the cold evening kept most people inside. The park was quiet, with only the wind rustling the trees. They walked in silence, their breath creating little clouds in the air. "Remember the first time we met?" Caius asked. Isolde smiled, her eyes glowing with the memory. "Of course I do. You spilled coffee on me, and instead of getting mad, you laughed. That was when I knew you weren't like anyone else," Caius said, smiling at the memory. Isolde smiled back, her eyes soft. "That's when I knew there was something special about you." They stood there, looking at each other in silence, their emotions flooding to the surface. "I still love you," Caius whispered. Isolde held her breath as she heard the words. Caius quickly added, "I'm not asking anything from you. I just want you to know that the man who hurt you doesn't exist anymore. The man I am now, the father I'm about to become, he's here, and I'm still in love with you." Isolde looked at him, and with a soft voice, she said, "I see the new you, and sometimes I wish I could trust it fully." Caius wanted to move closer, but he respected the space she needed. "We'll take it slow," he said gently. "One day at a time, one Harry Potter story at a time. We've got plenty of books to read." They stood there, the snow falling quietly around them. Caius knew that sometimes the most meaningful moments were in the silences. In the months that followed, a new rhythm formed between them. Caius never imagined his life would be like this. Warm evenings, books, and stories without rushing. This was the path that would lead them to the future they deserved. One morning, Caius made breakfast for Oliver before the boy rushed off to school. The afternoon would be filled with meetings, and the evenings with Oliver's homework and long, cozy conversations. But on one particular day, Caius felt the need to make a big announcement at work. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began at the board meeting, "I'm making some big changes. Starting next month, I'll be cutting down my work hours so I can spend more time with my family." Vanessa, sitting beside him, smiled. She knew this was a big change for Caius. Later, at home, Caius was caring for Zara, who had a fever. "Is she okay?" Isolde asked, looking at Caius with concern. "She's better now. The fever's gone," Caius replied gently. Isolde's eyes softened, filled with gratitude. "Thank you for caring for her like she's your own daughter," she said. Caius smiled. "That's exactly how it feels," he said. They shared a quiet moment together, and then Isolde spoke again. "I'm tired of being scared," she whispered. Caius's heart pounded as he tried to find the right words. Finally, he just spoke the truth. "I still love you," he admitted. Isolde's eyes glistened as she whispered, "I love you too. The man you've become is the man I always knew you could be." They stood in silence, staring into each other's eyes. Before they could kiss, a small voice interrupted them. "Mom?" Zara called from the other room. Isolde quickly pulled away, and they both went to check on Zara. Afterwards, they stood on the balcony, looking out at the night sky. "I don't want to rush anything," Caius said, his voice deep. "We've got a lot to rebuild." Isolde nodded. "But I think we've already been rebuilding for some time now, haven't we?" They looked at each other and realized that everything they had been through, though imperfect, had brought them to this new chapter in their lives. They were building something strong and real. Caius smiled as he remembered the moments they had shared, family dinners, afternoons in the park, reading together, and caring for each other. He knew that his greatest success wasn't in the skyscrapers he built, but in the love he had found in his family. One evening, while Caius was preparing to pick up Oliver from school, Isolde called with an urgent request. "Zara's sick. Can you pick her up? I have to go to the hospital." Caius didn't hesitate. "Don't worry. I'm on my way." A few hours later, Caius's apartment was no longer neat and organized. It had become a place of care and love where family came first. Work no longer seemed as important. Caius was focused on being the father and the man his family needed him to be. As he looked at a photo of his family, Caius realized that he was building something far more meaningful than just a successful career. He was building a family, one that was formed by love, second chances, and the heart. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.